Thank you. Thanks, Christine, and thanks, Canaccord, for sponsoring what is a really nice program, and appreciate your time and attendance. Thank you. Just the standard disclaimer. So just as an overview, as Christina mentioned, this is what we do. Sort of our focus, I guess historically, those who have known the company, wasn't necessarily and resolutely focused on paediatric neurological disorders, but that's certainly the way we're going now. And there's a number of reasons I hope I can convince you of as to why that's a meritorious endeavour. And from a valuation perspective, I think it offers the most return for investors over the long term. So we have a proprietary extract from a cannabis plant. I would like to think that we are not a cannabis company. We have a drug platform that so happens to be derived from a cannabis variety. Our focus is really to regulate ourselves with the most stringent regulators in the world, and that is the US Food and Drug Administration, that's the European Medicines Agency, and that's the Therapeutic Goods Administration. So with that, there's a lot of responsibility, there's a lot of work, costs a bit more, but what you end up with is a regulated drug with medical claims that you can charge a reasonable amount of dollars on because the cost effectiveness is high, and also for patients, it's good to the extent that the medical claims are supported by clinical results. This is just a corporate and cap table and summary. I think our performance has been pretty admirable in light of the rest of the sector and more broadly with ASX generally. What I would draw your eyes and attention to is the R&D investment, and also the operating expenditure in the business is $1 million annually. So everything we do goes to R&D. In the sector, if you are an investor in the sector, you don't want that to be a reversal. You want to see the expenditure go to the R&D. That's what matters most. People count for far less, I think, in this situation. It's all about the technology. These are the 4 core strategies that we've now implemented implementing since I joined approximately 6 weeks ago. So resolute focus on paediatric patients. More particularly, we are focused on rare neurological disorders with what's called neuroinflammation. So these are disorders where there's an inflammatory effect in the brain, and that manifests itself in certain disorders, which I'll come to. And we know through extensive third-party literature with respect to cannabinoids and cannabis generally, that they have a very well known and very well researched effect on inflammation, inflammatory processes, and also neuroprotection and neuroregulation. That is, the neuronal cells in the brain are nourished and they are protected from certain inflammatory processes. So the literature is great. That's why I joined. I have a background in the sector, and I like to think that we go into these trials with a really good sporting chance of showing a clinical effect. We also have what I think is a really nice barrier. We work with key paediatric professors of neurology as our partners for our NTI-164 formulation. They are not going to run trials on paediatric patients if you have an over-the-counter, unproven and poorly manufactured drug product. So that's good. And we're focused on drug development. So these are our 4 sort of core strategies in detail. Paediatric patients overlooked by Big Pharma, rule of thumb, they don't tend to focus down there. They tend to be unencumbered drug therapy markets. So what I mean by that is there's no standards of care, there's no approved treatments. That's fabulous when you want to run a clinical trial because you're going up against a placebo or nothing. You're not going up against a standard of care. So we have patients here that are not enrolled in clinical trials, and we have the ability to leverage levers at the FDA, EMA, and so on for these trials. We focus on rare disorders because, as I said, the literature is brilliant around the effects here. And NTI-164, we ourselves have shown that, and we focus on these neurological disorders with a first-in-child, in fact, product, NTI-164 for autism spectrum disorder. I've mentioned the clinical focus. I'll just go to the focus on drug development. So we are doing everything right by a drug regulator. We are manufacturing this properly, and it allows us and it confers on us premium pricing and reimbursement. You will not get reimbursement unless you have a proven medical claim, period. Commendable effort by the team. We've moved from a preclinical sort of stage into pro forma 2023, where we have multiple phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials in rare paediatric disorders. I'll come to PANS or PANDAS-PANS. I would guess 99% of people in this room would have never heard of that. that is a rare neurological disorder in children. They basically go to bed and wake up with uncontrolled tic movements and obsessive compulsive disorder, currently untreatable. We have a 10-patient study ready to go for PANS PANDAS. That is an effect in children that is profound, and moderately to severely ill children would be our target recruitment sort of profile. We also plan to initiate a phase 1/2 study in cerebral palsy, and also I'll come to some results in autism spectrum disorder, but we have also submitted for approval to start a phase 2/3 trial in autistic children next year as well. So that's my experience in career, that is a very rapid transition from preclinical to clinical, and the team's done a fabulous job there. I wanted to just put this quote up because this is the treatment goal for anyone that works with autistic children, and it's basically about enabling the child. So current treatments restrict the child. There's a treatment called risperidone. The role of that drug is to reduce or dampen the aggressiveness and irritability. It does nothing for the child's ability to interact with, to socialise with, and to be a more integrated person in society. We believe NTI-164 is an enabling therapy. That is, we are looking to improve all of these facets, and that is the absolute treatment goal in ASD, and that's sort of where we're focused. This is ASD in a I guess, a summary sense. It's much more prevalent than most in the room would probably appreciate. So 1 in 44 children have some form of ASD. The children we're treating on our trial, they have what's called level 2 and level 3 autism. So that's children that require substantial care to very substantial care and support. And as I mentioned at the start, we have a very strong rationale for treating these children. ASD is a neuroinflammatory disorder. It is a chronic disorder, and so our treatment is not a once and done reverse autism and the children are fine. It's an intervention that will be chronically administered. And again, going back to our strategy from a lifetime value perspective on a per patient, that makes it a very likeable and high quality drug profile, because the children will need to take this intervention for a long time. If they don't take it, then the symptoms will very much reverse. This was the trial. I won't sort of bore you with this more sort of detailed sort of designations here, but basically 14 children. It was a safety study over 28 days. Interestingly, which gives us some confidence as we continue to treat these children, all 14 children were strongly recommended by the clinician, Professor Michael Fay, and also their parents to continue treatment. So we had envisaged titrating these patients down after 28 days, but as it turns out, all patients continue treatment, and for us, albeit we don't sort of see how quickly the autism returns, what we do is collect a ton of data. And the data we reported in July of 2022 was at 28 days. We are imminently going to report the 20-week data in these children. But what I wanted to draw your attention to is that the fact that 93% of these patients showed an improvement in their clinical symptoms, and that's as measured by the clinician, not the patient or the caregiver. And the severity of illness score, I wanted to sort of just call this one out particularly, because the chart, I think, on the right may look complex, but it's a pretty easy to understand goal for us of what we need to do. So 7 is the most critically ill child, 1 is normal, and the orange curve, that's the normal distribution, but the orange blocks here represents the children at baseline, so day 0. And at day 28, we've shifted these markedly to severely ill children to what would be classified clinically as a mildly ill child. And that's after 28 days. So, neuroinflammation typically, if you're trying to dampen neuroinflammation, the longer you can intervene in inflammatory processes, so be it, the patient should get better. So what you should look out for with our 20-week data is you want to see this curve shift a little more to the left. Having said that, from a clinical perspective, that is an extraordinary shift right there at 28 days. And a clinician looking at that would look at the profile and go, that is clinically meaningful. So what does that mean? That in medical parlance means I would prescribe it, and that's important. Just going to our pro forma pipeline, again, what we've tried to do very quickly here is to add depth and breadth. So we're not a one-trick pony to the extent that we have 3 other paediatric disorders that we're looking at, so cerebral palsy, pandas, PANS, obviously including ASD. Our milestone, we have a rich vein, to use a resources parlance, of news flow that we expect to have this quarter and also progressively throughout 2023. So these are related to regulatory approvals to commence our trial, completing recruitment of these trials and reporting data from these trials. In the very near term, as I mentioned, keep your eye out for the 20-week data in these children. But I'm very excited and very pleased that we've been able to so quickly take this manufactured drug product and put it into very sick children. This is a summary of our strategy, and what I've done here is try to map out what we're doing and trying to compare and contrast that to what others have done. I'm unashamedly a fan of 2 companies. One's Neuron Pharmaceuticals in Australia. I followed that for 15 years. And GW Pharmaceuticals, because they, as well, like us, they have an extract or a highly purified extract of something called CBD, and that's derived from a cannabis plant. That was the first regulatory approved drug in the field. And the way that these companies have created extraordinary value for shareholders is just be really focused. So they both started off, funnily enough, looking in adult disorders. So GW was looking at, I think, MS and pain. So by total addressable market, $20 billion, brilliant. Well, what's your market share? 0.1 maybe if you're lucky and you get through the regulatory hurdles. So what they did is they stratified an epilepsy market. So epilepsy is a non-orphan or non-rare disorder of children as well, and adults. And they found 2 what we would call sub-indications called Dravet and Lennox-Gastaut. They levered those with those regulatory tools I've mentioned. They got approval and then they were required. And similarly, Neuron is very much on the same pathway. And so for us, we have these indications sitting here that we're currently treating, but we have greater potential to look at all these other indications as well, because guess what? The literature supports that there's a strong neuroinflammatory effect in each of these disorders. We treat neuroinflammatory disease, bang, there's your next study. So our outlook, we are focused on rare paediatric neurological disorders. We've shown now that NTI-164 is safe and efficacious at 28 days. Our 20-week data is imminent. We have these accelerated clinical development tools via those deep clinical relationships with professors of neurology, both in Monash in Melbourne and also at Westmead in Sydney. We're driving hard to recruit and treat these patients. It's very likely, if the treatment continues to show an effect, that we will provide the treatment ongoing for these children. So we will continue to report lots of data over the longer term. So, for example, PANS PANDAS is just looking at 10 children over 8 weeks. If it works, those children will continue to receive the intervention. We have that really good clinical engagement. So I think that is one of the best barriers we have in Australia. I'm sure most of you in the room are highly familiar with tons and tons of over-the-counter cannabis formulations in oil, sprays, tablets. None of them have any ability to claim a medical indication. So what's happened in the last few weeks is the Therapeutic Goods Administration has fined 3 companies $1 million for basically promoting their extract, their formulation as treating a medical disorder. You can't do that unless you've got clinical evidence. So the way we do it is to get the clinical evidence by basically manufacturing a product that is fit for purpose from a regulatory perspective, and we deeply and thoroughly engage with the clinicians and their ethics committees at the hospitals. So we love that. So it would be very unusual, I think, from here to see other cannabis companies coming in and working with these same professors in much the same indications. And we have lots of levers at the Food and Drug Administration and the European Medicines Agency. So I will wrap it up and leave it there, and thank you for your attention. Please stop by if you want to have a chat later. Appreciate it.